The day of the divorce. She collapsed. The baby? His exact copy. The silence between them was deafening. The civil registry had that unbearable smell of old paper and fresh ink, a bureaucratic aroma that had nothing to do with the story they had just closed. Clara and Daniel sat opposite each other, separated by a cold table and a stack of papers that sealed what was once love. She held the pen tightly, not from indecision, but to keep her fingers from trembling. Her name was already there, printed in black ink, waiting only for the last signature. Daniel's. He, for his part, maintained his immobile expression, as he always did. His features rigid, his dark eyes hiding any trace of emotion. He took the pen with the precision of someone accustomed to definitive decisions. The stroke on the paper was quick, firm, without hesitation. No tears were shed, no protest or last-ditch attempt to fix things. Just a discreet, farewell gesture. Clara felt the weight in her chest, not of regret, but of exhaustion. It wasn't just the divorce. It was the months of weariness, the sleepless nights, the effort to maintain her dignity intact while everything around her crumbled. And now, there was nothing left to hold on to. She picked up the documents with stiff fingers and stood up. The movement was small, insignificant, but inside her, something broke. The room spun. First, a sharp ringing in her ears. Then, darkness. The impact wasn't hard, but the sound of her body hitting the floor made Daniel's world collapse. He was by her side before anyone else could react. His voice, always so controlled, broke into panic. "Clara! Clara! Talk to me!" She didn't respond. Her face was pale, her lips parted as if trying to breathe. Time seemed to drag as the registry employees ran, voices mingling in a distant echo. But Daniel only saw Clara. He only heard the sound of his own heart beating erratically in his chest. "Call an ambulance!" His voice was a roar. The next few minutes were a blur of sirens and red lights reflecting in the glass of the buildings. Daniel didn't let go of her hand for a second. Even unconscious, Clara's skin was warm. Is she alive? He didn't know why that mattered so much. He didn't know why, after signing those papers, feeling her weak pulse beneath his fingers caused him a desperation he hadn't felt in a long time. But then, at the hospital, everything changed. The smell of antiseptic and the monotonous sound of monitors arrived before her eyes opened. Clara blinked against the white light of the room and felt the world spin slightly. The white ceiling, the pale walls, all so sterile, so empty. And then she saw him. Daniel was there. The impeccable suit from a few hours ago was now wrinkled, his tie knot loose. But what really caught her attention were his eyes. He looked at her as if he had seen a ghost, as if he were lost. Before Clara could say anything, the door opened, and a doctor entered. The man held a folder, his expression overly professional for what he was about to say. "Mrs. Davies, we have your test results." She forced herself to pay attention. "Your fainting spell was caused by a drop in blood pressure. Something common, considering your condition." Clara frowned. "My condition?" The doctor paused, as if expecting her to already know. But she didn't. "Congratulations, you're pregnant. 3 months. The silence that followed was absolute. Clara blinked. Her mind raced in 1,000 directions, trying to process the words, looking for some flaw in the logic, some explanation that wasn't that. Pregnant. She was pregnant. And when her gaze finally met Daniel's, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. He wasn't breathing. His eyes, which always hid everything, were now open in a way she had never seen before. For the first time in his life, Daniel was completely lost. The end of them had become the beginning of something much bigger. Clara felt the air weigh heavily around her. The doctor's words still floated in the silence of the room, as if time had refused to move forward from the moment they were spoken. Pregnant. She didn't know why that hit her with such force. It wasn't as if she had never considered the possibility. There were symptoms she ignored. Tiredness she attributed to the stress of the divorce. Nausea she treated as anxiety. Everything made sense now. But knowing was different from feeling. And in that instant, she felt the impact like an electric shock piercing every fiber of her body. Daniel was still there, standing, not moving a muscle. His eyes fixed on her, as if waiting for a reaction, a confirmation, anything that would help him process the new reality. But Clara had no answers. She averted her gaze, fixing it on a spot on the white sheet. She needed something solid, something that wouldn't move beneath her feet. This doesn't change anything. The words came out before she could contain them, cold, firm, a barrier she tried to raise between herself and the confusion expanding within her. But Daniel noticed. He always noticed. The slight tremor in her voice, the way her hands, resting on the sheet, were slightly clenched. He took a step forward. Clara felt his energy invade the space between them. The woody, familiar perfume, a scent she knew better than she cared to. He was always there, on her skin, in her sheets, in the moments when they were still a couple, and she allowed herself to believe it could be forever. But now, she had to maintain control. "This is our child, Clara." His voice lacked its usual firmness. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't an order. It was a fact. One that carried the weight of everything they had lost, and of what, somehow, still existed between them. Clara looked up. The clash between them was palpable. Daniel didn't seem like the same man who signed those papers at the civil registry a few hours earlier. That man was cold, distant, as if nothing could touch him. But this one, standing before her, had a face marked by the impact of the news. Dark eyes, laden with something she didn't want to decipher. Because if she looked too long, perhaps she would find vestiges of the love she was trying to bury. She breathed slowly, tasting the metallic flavor of uncertainty on her tongue. "I don't need you for this, Daniel." She saw him blink, as if the phrase had been an unexpected blow. "Don't be ridiculous." The answer came sharp, cutting. But the anger wasn't in his voice. It was somewhere else, deeper, more dangerous. She refused to back down. "Ridiculous? For not wanting you to interfere in my life? In your life?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "This isn't just about you, Clara." She gritted her teeth. "Oh no, because it seems that until a few minutes ago, none of this existed for you. You signed those papers, Daniel. I'm no longer your wife." He leaned slightly forward, narrowing the distance between them. "But I'm still the father of this child." Clara felt her heart race, but she kept her face impassive. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, an impatient gesture she knew well. He was fighting against something within himself. "Do you really think you can exclude me from this?" She averted her gaze. "The truth? I don't know." She didn't know how to deal with it. She didn't know how to move forward without feeling the weight of the past pressing on her shoulders. I need time." It was the first truly sincere thing she said since the impact of that news hit her. He was silent for a moment, watching her as if trying to decipher every thought she couldn't yet organize. "I'm not going anywhere, Clara." She closed her eyes. That was what she feared, because no matter how much she tried to deny it, a part of her wanted to believe he was telling the truth. And that part was too dangerous to be heard. Clara averted her gaze, feeling the suffocating weight of Daniel's presence in the room. He was still there, watching her with that intensity that always left her vulnerable. But now, there was no room for vulnerability, not after everything they had been through. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to find a trace of calm within the whirlwind forming in her mind. But all she found was the echo of a past that had never completely left her. Their story was never ordinary. At first, it seemed invincible. The first encounter was by chance, one of those moments that destiny orchestrates with surgical precision. Clara was in Paris for a conference. Daniel was there for a business meeting. Two strangers in a foreign city, united by chance and by the undeniable spark that arose as soon as their eyes met. He was confident, charming in a way that wasn't limited to words. There was something in the way he looked at her, as if he saw something in her that no one else saw. Clara was never one to act on impulse, but that night, when Daniel invited her to dinner, she accepted without hesitation. Paris was the beginning. They were nights in dimly lit restaurants, whispered conversations about dreams and ambitions, murmured promises between sheets. Clara had never felt anything like it before. The world seemed more vibrant when she was with him, more intense. And Daniel made her feel alive in a way no one else had. When they returned home, it wasn't long before everything became even more serious. The courtship quickly evolved into an engagement, and in a short time, into a marriage that, at first glance, seemed perfect. But perfection was an illusion. The first signs of wear came silently, like small cracks in a wall that, from a distance, still seemed intact. Daniel had always been a man of insatiable ambition. He didn't just want the best. He demanded the best. He was meticulous, strategic, determined to build an empire that would be unbreakable. And at first, Clara admired that in him. But she soon realized that his ambition consumed everything around him, including her. Nights, once filled with long dinners and laughter, became solitary. Daniel spent more time in meetings than at home. When he returned, it was too late for any meaningful conversation. Silence began to grow between them, occupying the space that was once filled with desire, laughter, and love. Clara tried to convince herself that it was just a phase, that everything would return to normal. But then came the demands. Daniel was never the type to raise his voice. He never explicitly forbade anything. But there was always a comment, a suggestion, a look that said more than words. You don't need to work anymore. I can give you everything. This dress is a bit daring, don't you think? I don't think it's a good idea for you to travel alone. What will people think? At first, they were small concessions, nothing that seemed significant enough to be a problem. But, little by little, she realized that she was disappearing within the marriage. Invitations to events became rarer. Outings with friends became a source of veiled arguments. Clara no longer recognized the woman she saw in the mirror. And when she tried to talk about it, when she gathered the courage to tell Daniel that she felt suffocated, that she needed space for herself, he simply didn't listen. That's just in your head, Clara. I only want what's best for you. The best. What Daniel never understood was that the best for her was not what he thought was right. The first time she asked for time, Daniel laughed. He actually laughed, as if the idea were absurd. You're being dramatic. The second time, he was silent for a few seconds before simply changing the subject. And the third time, when Clara could no longer breathe within the marriage, he looked at her with disbelief. I don't know what else you need. I've given you everything. Everything except freedom, except choice, except the feeling that she still owned her own life. That's how their love was lost, not in a big scandal, not in a devastating betrayal, but in the slow, irreversible erosion of a marriage that stopped being a home. And now, there, in the hospital, forced to face the man she once loved more than anything. Clara felt as if she were back in that moment. The past infiltrated the present like a ghost that refused to disappear. Daniel was no longer her husband. He no longer had control over her. But somehow, he still had power over her feelings, and that terrified her. She breathed slowly, trying to keep her voice firm. "You can want to be part of this, Daniel, but I don't know if I want you near me." He didn't blink. "Do you still hate me that much?" Clara pressed her lips together. "Hate you? I don't hate you, Daniel. The problem is precisely that." For a moment, he seemed confused, but then something gleamed in his eyes, comprehension, and a flicker of something more, hope. "This isn't over, Clara." She felt her heart tighten. "It is over, Daniel. We signed those papers." "But a paper doesn't erase what we were." Clara averted her gaze. "But it can prevent us from being something again." The answer hung in the air. The past pursued them. And whether they wanted to or not, they would have to face it. Daniel was never a man who accepted defeat. For him, everything was a matter of strategy. Planning, control. He always knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. He had built his career that way. He kept his life organized that way. The world was a chessboard, and he was always the most skilled player. But Clara was never a pawn in that game. And now, for the first time in his life, Daniel didn't know what to do. He watched her from the other side of the room, his arms crossed over his chest, as if trying to protect himself from her proximity. Since they received the news of the pregnancy, Clara had grown more distant each day, rejecting any attempt at closeness. But there were moments when he saw her resistance waver, when their gazes met for too long, when their fingers accidentally touched, when the silence between them became denser than the words they tried to say to each other. She still felt something for him. He knew it. But would it be enough? Daniel clenched his jaw and looked away to the window. Outside, the day stretched on, indifferent to the chaos within him. He hated that feeling of powerlessness, that uncertainty creeping under his skin like a poison. He needed to show he had changed. But how? Because, if he was honest with himself, he didn't know exactly how to change. Clara had always been his exception, his ruin and his salvation. And now, everything depended on his ability to convince her that he would never leave her alone again. He turned to look at her again, observing the way she kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her arms still crossed like an invisible barrier. "You can't push me away from this, Clara." She slowly raised her eyes, and he saw the internal battle reflected there. "I'm not trying to push you away, but that doesn't mean I trust you." Daniel took a deep breath, holding back the instinctive reply he wanted to give. The older version of himself would have argued, tried to reason with logic, proving with well-structured words that he was right. But that had never worked with Clara. And if he wanted her to believe him, he would have to act differently. He took a step forward. Clara didn't back away, but her body tensed. "I know words aren't enough, but if you give me the chance, I'll show you I'm different." She laughed, but there was no humor in her laugh. "Do you think this is a contract, Daniel? Something that can be resolved with promises and guarantees?" He studied her for a moment before replying. "No, I think it's much more than that." The answer took her by surprise. Clara blinked, her lips parted as if she was about to argue, but nothing came out. He moved a little closer, just enough to feel her accelerated breathing. "Let me be here." She held his gaze. "And when things get difficult, will you still be here?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes. And when work demands everything from you, I choose you." Clara closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing those words. When she opened them again, Daniel realized she wasn't ready to yield. Not yet. But something in her had changed. He saw it in the way she didn't retreat this time, in how her eyes lingered on his for a little longer before looking away. It still wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. Do you think Daniel has truly changed, or is this just a temporary reaction to the news? Share your thoughts in the comments. The months passed in a blur. Time, which once seemed an implacable enemy, now became a silent ally, allowing Clara and Daniel to navigate this new reality at a pace they could both handle. He was still there, present at every appointment, attentive to every detail, always making sure she didn't have to bear that burden alone. And Clara, little by little, began to allow herself to trust it. Not completely, not without reservations, but enough to accept the hot coffee he handed her without her having to ask, to let him walk her home when she was too tired to drive. Enough to allow him to be near. And then, in an instant, everything crumbled. It was an ordinary day, or at least, it should have been. Clara left the doctor's office with a discreet smile. The pregnancy was going well, the baby was healthy, and for the first time in a long time, she felt light. Until she saw Daniel across the street. She knew he would come for her. He always did lately. But there was something different about him that day. Something tense, rigid. Clara frowned and crossed the street, feeling a growing unease in her chest. Is everything all right? Daniel didn't answer immediately. His jaw was tight, his dark eyes laden with something she couldn't decipher. And then he blurted out, "Were you with him?" Clara blinked, confused. With whom? Edward. The name came out laden with venom, and only then did Clara understand. Edward was her former colleague, a friend, someone who had been close when her marriage began to fall apart, offering support without ever overstepping boundaries. But Daniel always hated Edward. He always saw him as a threat, even though Clara had assured him countless times that there was nothing between them beyond friendship. She felt a tightness in her chest. Daniel, I ran into him by chance. We talked for a few minutes and nothing more. But he was no longer listening. Sure, it was just a coincidence, right? The same guy who spent years waiting for me to make a mistake so he could get close to you. Daniel's tone was becoming harsher, colder. And in that instant, Clara felt transported back to the past, to a time when her every word was analyzed with distrust, when her every movement was a possible threat to the control Daniel insisted on having over her. And the worst part? She saw in his eyes that he perceived it too, that he saw the exact moment she closed herself off again. But instead of backing down, he advanced. Are you still talking to him? His voice was low, but laden with something somber. Clara crossed her arms. I'm not going to answer that kind of question. Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. Of course not. Because you're never wrong, are you, Clara? She felt a knot form in her throat. He didn't realize what he was doing. Daniel, stop! But he didn't stop. I should have known. You've always had an enormous knack for trusting the wrong people. The words were spoken without thinking, but the impact was immediate. Clara stood motionless, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her chest. And then, something inside her broke. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. I'm not doing this again! Her voice came out low, but firm. Daniel realized too late. Clara! But she was already walking away. You promised you had changed. He ran a hand over his face, as if trying to contain something within himself. I did change. Then why do you keep trying to control me? He had no answer. Clara exhaled slowly, feeling her chest tremble. I need space. No! Daniel's reply was immediate, but this time it wasn't an order. It was a plea. "Don't push me away, Clara." She closed her eyes. "Then give me a reason not to." The silence that followed was devastating, and when Daniel finally tried to speak, it was too late. She was already gone. In the following days, Daniel tried to call, tried to stop by her apartment, tried to find any way to undo that mistake. But Clara didn't answer. And then, when he finally went to her house, he found the door closed, the lights off, and a neighbor who looked at him with pity. "She traveled," the man said. Daniel felt his stomach sink. "What do you mean, traveled?" "Where?" "I don't know, mate. I just know she rented the place out for a while. Said she was taking a break in the city." Daniel stood there, unable to react. Clara was gone. She was really gone. And this time, perhaps she wouldn't come back. He felt his heart pound in his chest, his breath shallow. His head told him that was it, that he had lost her. But then, for the first time in his life, Daniel realized that just wanting to change wasn't enough. He would have to prove it. And, above all, he would have to be patient. Clara was far away, and he didn't know if she would ever come back. But if she did, he would be ready. This time, without trying to control her, without trying to convince her, just waiting. Because for the first time, he was willing to be a man who deserved to be by her side. And if he had to wait forever, he would wait. She was gone. The emptiness that remained after Clara left was worse than anything Daniel had felt. It wasn't just the anger that pulsed in his mind, nor the frustration of having reverted to the man he promised he would never be again. It was fear, the fear of having lost her forever. In the following days, he tried to give her space, but her silence was unbearable. Clara didn't reply to his messages, didn't answer his calls. He stopped by her apartment, but she didn't open the door. And then, when he finally decided to back off and wait for her to come to him, fate showed him it wouldn't grant him that luxury. The call came in the middle of the night. The hospital number glowed on his phone screen, and everything inside him froze. "Mr. Davies?" The sound of his own name made his heart ache against his ribs. "Yes." "You need to come to the hospital now. It's about Clara." He didn't remember the drive there, only the metallic taste of panic in his mouth, his trembling hands on the steering wheel, the suffocating feeling that if something happened to her or the baby, he would never forgive himself. When he arrived, the hospital was bathed in that cold, indifferent light, and the antiseptic smell seemed stronger than usual. He crossed the corridors with long strides until he found a nurse who immediately recognized him. "Where is she?" The woman hesitated for a second. "Mrs. Davies was admitted with complications. They had to take her to surgery." The word hit Daniel like a punch. "Surgery?" "She had a premature placental abruption. The situation is delicate, but the doctors are doing everything they can." Delicate. The word resonated in his mind as the world around him lost its shape. He sat in the nearest chair, but he couldn't feel anything beneath him. It was as if he were floating, as if his own existence had been reduced to that moment. And then, for the first time in his life, Daniel understood what it meant to be completely powerless. There was nothing he could do, no strategy he could devise, no money he could pay to fix this. He could only wait and pray. Time became distorted. Every minute seemed an eternity. And then, finally, a doctor appeared. Daniel jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. "How is she?" The doctor sighed, and Daniel felt the weight of that sound even before the words were spoken. "The baby is in fetal distress. We need to act fast." It was then that Daniel understood what that meant. They had to choose. Save Clara, or save the baby. The floor seemed to disappear beneath his feet. "We'll do our best for both of them," the doctor said, trying to remain calm. "But Mr. Davies, if we have to prioritize one of them, we need your decision now." The decision. The moment that would define everything. He looked towards the closed door of the room where Clara was. Would he lose her? After everything, after finally understanding that he loved her in a way he never comprehended before, after realizing that she was the center of everything, would he have to let her go? And then, for a second, a memory came to his mind. Clara, the first time she felt the baby move, bringing her hands to her belly with a smile of pure adoration. Clara, caressing the ultrasound picture as if she had known that little life inside her for years. Clara, saying softly, one night, without knowing he was listening, "I would do anything for my child." That was it. That was what really mattered. He closed his eyes for an instant and took a deep breath, and then he looked at the doctor. "Save the baby." The doctor nodded and disappeared down the corridors, and Daniel remained there, alone, feeling the weight of the most difficult decision he had ever made. Time passed slowly, and when the door to the surgery room finally opened, everything inside him stopped. Because there, surrounded by nurses, with a tired but alive look, was Clara. She survived, and the baby too. But something was different. Clara was weak, pale, her eyes heavy from exhaustion and pain. When their eyes finally met, something gleamed there. Not anger, not total relief, but something deep. Something between gratitude and incomprehension. She moved her lips, her voice almost a whisper. "You chose the baby?" Daniel's chest tightened. "I chose what you would have chosen." The silence between them was thick, and then the tears came. Not from him, but from her. Clara didn't cry from weakness, nor from pain. She cried because for the first time, she saw Daniel understand what it meant to love someone without trying to possess them, without trying to mold them. He understood. And in that instant, Daniel knew that his life would never be the same. This time, he hadn't fought to win Clara. He had fought to be the man she deserved. And perhaps, for the first time, he was close to achieving it. What it meant to love someone more than himself. And now, there, standing in front of the room where Clara held the baby's small, fragile body against her chest, Daniel felt something he had never experienced before. The fullness of having done the right thing. The following months were a blur of changes. Clara needed time to recover from the surgery. The baby was under observation for a few weeks, but soon the doctors assured them he was healthy. A boy, small, but strong. They named him Leo. It was Clara who chose the name, and Daniel didn't argue. For the first time, he accepted something without objection. He had already made all the wrong decisions in the past. This one, he wanted it to be hers. But accepting didn't mean everything was easy. Because, if there was one thing Daniel had learned, it was that love cannot be forced. Love is conquered, day after day, and that's exactly what he did. Clara's house became a silent refuge, where time seemed to slow down. Daniel came almost every day, but he didn't intrude. He never crossed the boundaries she imposed. When Clara needed to rest, he stayed with Leo. When Leo cried in the middle of the night, he arrived before Clara could get up. And when she felt lost, exhausted, overwhelmed with it all, Daniel simply was there. Without demanding, without pressuring, waiting. And Clara realized. She realized that for the first time, Daniel wasn't trying to control her. He wasn't trying to define what they would be. He simply remained present, like a silent certainty, like a firm foundation she could choose to use, or not. He changed, and she did too, because at some point, Clara found herself watching him with different eyes. Not the Daniel she had left, not the Daniel she feared, but the Daniel who held Leo in his arms with a tenderness she never imagined he possessed. The Daniel who wasn't impatient when the baby cried. The Daniel who made coffee for her every morning without saying anything, simply leaving the cup on the counter before he left. The Daniel who understood when she needed silence. And little by little, Clara felt the armor she had built begin to crack. Time passed. And then, something happened. The first time he touched her again was unintentional. Clara was on the sofa, holding Leo, when Daniel sat next to her. He gently ran his hand through the baby's hair, and his arm brushed hers. An insignificant touch, but Clara felt it. She felt the warmth of his skin, the familiarity of that gesture. She felt the years return in a second. She felt her heart race, and when she looked up, Daniel was already watching her. They remained like that for a moment. Silence, a mutual understanding. And then Clara looked away, because she wasn't ready yet. But she knew, in that instant, that it was only a matter of time. The problem was that time didn't wait for them. That night, it was raining heavily. Daniel was about to leave when Clara, who was watching the storm from the window, finally made a decision. "Stay." The word was said so softly that, for a second, Daniel thought he had imagined it. But then she turned to look at him, and in her eyes, there was something new, something definitive. He didn't ask if he could, and she didn't need to answer. Because when he approached, Clara raised her face to receive him. The kiss was slow, different from all the ones they had shared before. There was no rush. There was no need. It was a choice. And, when he separated his lips from hers, Clara finally realized. They weren't coming back because they needed each other. They were coming back because they loved each other. This time, their love wasn't a power game. It was a partnership. And finally, it was enough. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep our content fresh and exciting for you. Thanks for joining us and being part of this journey.